In the opulent yet shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, secrets run as deep as the family's wealth. On a stormy autumn evening, a small group of strangers gathers at the invitation of Lady Evangeline Blackthorn, the enigmatic matriarch of the estate. The pretense is simple: a charity auction and a celebration of life, marking 10 years since the tragic death of her husband, Lord Charles Blackthorn. However, beneath the surface, motives twist like ivy on the grand stone walls. Among the guests is Lydia Harrington, a struggling artist whose invitation to the manor feels like fate. Haunted by a past she can't escape, Lydia's arrival brings her face to face with Damien Winterbourne, a man whose charm hides his own labyrinth of secrets. Their connection is immediate and electric, yet fraught with mistrust. When a guest is found dead, a single red rose resting on their chest, it becomes clear that the manor's dark history is far from over. Lydia is thrust into a deadly game of cat and mouse, where every gaze is suspect, every whispered word a potential clue. As the body count rises, the distinction between friend and foe blurs, and Lydia realizes that desire and danger are often one and the same. Set against the backdrop of roaring fires, opulent chandeliers, and the relentless howl of the wind outside, Shadows of Desire and Deceit weaves a tale of passion, treachery, and murder. In this dance of deception, who will emerge unscathed, and who will succumb to the shadows? Chapter 1: The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. Lydia Harrington was staring at the cracked paint on her apartment wall when the letter arrived. The envelope was crisp and elegant, the kind that exuded wealth. Her name, Lydia Rose Harrington, was written in flowing ink that reminded her of another time, another life. The Blackthorn seal gleamed in crimson wax, a promise of intrigue and importance. She didn't know why her name had made it onto Lady Evangeline Blackthorn's guest list. Blackthorn Manor was legendary in the region, both for its beauty and for the tragic stories that seemed to haunt its halls. The last time she had heard the name Blackthorn, she was a child, listening to hushed whispers of the lord who had fallen to his death in the garden maze. Curiosity had always been Lydia's vice. That, and her ability to see beauty in darkness. Without thinking twice, she found herself accepting the invitation and boarding a train that carried her far from the noisy streets of London to the isolated elegance of Blackthorn Manor. The manor was every bit as grand as the stories had promised. Looming stone towers pierced the grey sky, ivy crawled up the walls like secrets desperate to escape, and gargoyle statues glared from their perches, daring visitors to venture closer. Lydia's cab halted at the wrought iron gates, and she stepped out, clutching her worn leather suitcase. "Miss Harrington?" A man in a sharp suit approached, his voice clipped and professional. "Lady Blackthorn will be pleased to see you. If you'll follow me." The grand foyer swallowed her whole. Marble floors gleamed, and a grand staircase twisted upward like a staircase to another world. A fire roared in the stone hearth, throwing flickering shadows onto the gold-framed portraits of Blackthorns long gone. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and something darker, something faintly metallic. Other guests milled about, dressed in silks and satins, their laughter carrying a brittle edge. Lydia felt out of place in her simple dress and scuffed boots, but no one paid her much attention. That was, until a man with piercing grey eyes stepped into her path. "You're not what I expected," he said, his voice low and smooth, like the first notes of a cello. He was tall, his dark hair neatly combed, and his smile both charming and disarming. "I wasn't aware you were expecting me," Lydia replied, her heart racing as she met his gaze. "Damien Winterbourne," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Lady Blackthorn's confidant of sorts. And you are Lydia Harrington." She hesitated, then added, "Artist. Interesting. A painter among a sea of collectors and socialites. I'd wager you'll be the most fascinating guest here." His smile deepened, and for a moment, she felt as if the grand hall and all its splendor had faded away. Before she could reply, the chime of a bell drew everyone's attention. A butler stood at the base of the staircase, his expression solemn. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Evangeline Blackthorn will see you in the drawing room. Please, this way." Damien offered Lydia his arm, and she accepted, even as her instincts warned her to tread carefully. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, their gazes laden with judgment, curiosity, or something darker. The drawing room was as opulent as the rest of the manor, with high-backed chairs arranged in a semicircle around a crackling fire. Lady Blackthorn sat at the center, a vision of grace in a black silk gown. Her silver hair was pinned up, and her dark eyes swept over the room with a quiet intensity. "Welcome to Blackthorn Manor," she said, her voice smooth as honey yet carrying an undertone of steel. I've brought you here tonight because each of you has a part to play in a legacy that is not yet finished. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but Lydia's pulse quickened. Legacy, secrets, and a room full of strangers with unknown intentions. She had a feeling this weekend would change her life. She just didn't know if it would be for better or for worse. Lydia's first night at Blackthorn Manor was restless. The vast canopy bed, with its velvet curtains and silken sheets, felt too indulgent, too suffocating for someone used to her drafty little flat in London. Outside her window, the wind howled like a mournful ghost, rattling the glass panes. She rolled over, trying to shut her mind off, but her thoughts were tangled with impressions of the evening: Lady Blackthorn's piercing gaze, the opulence of the manor, and Damien Winterbourne's enigmatic smile. The evening's festivities had been subdued, though the atmosphere hummed with tension. Whispers floated through the drawing room like the strains of a melancholy waltz. Lydia had tried to decipher snippets of conversation, but the other guests seemed practiced at saying much while revealing little. Finally, unable to sleep, Lydia slipped out of her room. The long corridor stretched before her, dimly lit by flickering sconces. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and made her way toward the one place she felt might provide solace: the library. Blackthorn Manor's library was legendary, and stepping into it was like entering a cathedral of knowledge. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, crammed with books bound in leather and cloth. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its embers casting a warm glow over the room. The scent of old paper and faint traces of pipe smoke lingered in the air. Lydia ran her fingers along the spines of the books, marveling at the titles. Many were first editions, their covers worn but regal. She was about to pull down a volume of poetry when a voice startled her. "Couldn't sleep, Miss Harrington?" She turned sharply to see Damien Winterbourne lounging in one of the high-backed chairs by the fire, a book open in his hands. He looked impossibly at ease, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face and the glint of mischief in his eyes. "I didn't think anyone else would be awake," Lydia admitted, clutching her cardigan like armor. "Sleep can be elusive in this house," Damien said, closing his book. "Something about the air here. It stirs the mind, doesn't it?" Lydia hesitated, then walked toward him, drawn by his presence despite herself. "What are you reading?" "An old favorite." He held up the book, and she caught the title, The Hound of the Baskervilles. "A murder mystery," she said with a faint smile. "Fitting." Damien chuckled. "I have a weakness for tales of intrigue. Speaking of which, how are you finding Blackthorn Manor so far?" "It's overwhelming," Lydia admitted. "Beautiful, but it feels like every corner is watching you." "That's a fair assessment," Damien said, leaning forward. "Blackthorn has a way of revealing things, about itself and about the people who walk its halls. You do well to keep your wits about you, Miss Harrington." The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Lydia's skin prickled. "What do you mean?" Before Damien could answer, a sudden noise shattered the quiet. It was faint but distinct, a crash, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Lydia tensed. What was that? "Let's find out," Damien said, rising to his feet with the fluidity of a predator. He gestured for Lydia to follow him, and together they slipped out of the library. The hallway was darker than before, the sconces dimmed as if the manor itself were holding its breath. The sound had come from the east wing, a part of the house that Lydia hadn't explored yet. "Stay close," Damien murmured. They turned a corner and came upon a shattered vase lying in the middle of the corridor. Shards of porcelain glinted in the faint light, and water pooled on the floor. Damien crouched to examine the pieces, his expression unreadable. "Strange," he murmured. This vase was part of Lady Blackthorn's personal collection. "It shouldn't be here." "Maybe someone knocked it over," Lydia suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Damien shook his head. "This corridor leads to the private quarters. No one should be here except the family." A chill ran down Lydia's spine. "So what are we saying? Someone broke in? Or someone wants us to think that?" Before Lydia could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the hall. It was a man, his features obscured by the low light, but his posture was tense, almost predatory. "Who's there?" Damien called, his voice sharp. The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and disappeared down another corridor. "Stay here," Damien said, starting after the stranger. "Wait." Lydia protested, but Damien was already gone. She was left alone in the dimly lit corridor, her heart pounding. The silence pressed down on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching her from the shadows. Moments later, Damien returned, his expression grim. "He's gone. Did you see who it was?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. "No," Damien admitted. "But whoever it was, they're familiar with the manor. They knew exactly where to go to vanish." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the encounter settling over them. Finally, Damien spoke again. "Come on. Let's get back to the library. There's no point wandering the halls tonight." Lydia nodded, but as they walked back to the warmth of the firelight, she couldn't shake the feeling that the manor's secrets were beginning to stir, and that she was now a part of whatever game was being played. Morning at Blackthorn Manor dawned under a blanket of mist, the sun struggling to penetrate the gloom. Lydia awoke to the muffled sounds of the household stirring, footsteps echoing down long corridors, the faint clatter of china in the dining room. She dressed quickly, her mind still replaying the strange events of the night before, the shattered vase, the mysterious figure, and Damien's cryptic warnings. As she descended the grand staircase, she found Damien waiting near the foot, a steaming cup of tea in his hand. His sharp grey eyes met hers, and he gave her a slight smile. "Sleep well?" he asked, his tone laced with irony. "Not exactly," Lydia replied. "But I assume that's common in this house." "Very," he said. "Lady Blackthorn requested your presence after breakfast. She wants to give you a personal tour of the manor." Lydia's brow furrowed. "A tour? Why?" "She has her reasons," Damien said with a shrug. "With Evangeline, there's always a reason. But if you're smart, you'll take the opportunity. Blackthorn Manor reveals itself in layers, Miss Harrington. You'll want to see what lies beneath." Before Lydia could press him further, the dining room doors swung open, and Lady Blackthorn herself appeared, an imposing figure in a tailored emerald green dress. Her silver hair was impeccable, and her dark eyes seemed to appraise Lydia with a mix of curiosity and calculation. "Miss Harrington," she said, her voice as smooth as polished marble. "I trust you found the accommodations satisfactory?" "They're lovely, thank you," Lydia replied, though the edge in her voice betrayed her lingering unease. "Good," Lady Blackthorn said briskly. "I thought it might be helpful for you to become better acquainted with the house. It has history, after all." As they walked through the halls, Lady Blackthorn explained the manor's origins with a practiced air. "Blackthorn was built in the late 18th century by my husband's ancestors. It's seen its share of triumphs and tragedies, as any home of its age will." They passed through a long gallery lined with portraits of Blackthorn ancestors, their painted eyes following Lydia as she walked. Lady Blackthorn paused before a particularly striking portrait of a man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. "This is Charles, my late husband," she said, her tone softening for the first time. "He built much of what you see today. His death was a loss I will never recover from." Lydia studied the portrait, noting the intensity in the man's gaze. There was a magnetism to him, even in oil and canvas. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Lady Blackthorn said, her voice tight. "Come. There's something I'd like to show you." They continued down a narrower corridor that seemed less polished than the rest of the manor. The walls here were lined with faded wallpaper, and the air carried a faint chill. At the end of the hall, Lady Blackthorn stopped before an unassuming wooden door. She produced a key from her pocket and unlocked it with a deliberate motion. Inside was a small study, dimly lit by a single window obscured by heavy drapes. The room smelled of old paper and dust, and its centerpiece was a massive desk piled with ledgers, letters, and what appeared to be journals. "This was Charles's sanctuary," Lady Blackthorn said. "Few have ever been allowed in here." Lydia felt a strange thrill at the implication. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're not like the others," Lady Blackthorn said, fixing her with a piercing stare. "You have an artist's eye. You see what others overlook. And I need someone like that now." Lady Blackthorn crossed to the desk and opened one of the drawers, pulling out a leather-bound journal. She handed it to Lydia, who hesitated before accepting it. "This was Charles's," she said. "He was a meticulous man, always keeping records. But near the end of his life, his notes became strange. I believe he was trying to tell me something, though I've never been able to piece it together." Lydia opened the journal, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting that filled the pages. Most of it seemed ordinary, accounts of daily events, business dealings, but as she flipped further, the tone shifted. The writing grew erratic, the lines disjointed. One phrase caught her attention, written in bold letters across an entire page. "The truth lies in the room behind the rose." "What does this mean?" Lydia asked, showing Lady Blackthorne the page. "That's what I need you to help me discover," Lady Blackthorne said, her voice low. "There are rooms in this house even I don't fully understand. Charles once told me the house has secrets, a legacy tied to the Blackthorne name. I thought it was his way of romanticizing the past, but now I'm not so sure." Lydia's pulse quickened as she absorbed the implications. A hidden room? A cryptic message? It was like something out of the novels she had devoured as a teenager. "I'll do what I can," Lydia said, "but I'm not sure where to start." "Start with Damien," Lady Blackthorne said. "He knows this house better than anyone. But tread carefully, Miss Harrington. Not everyone in this house can be trusted." The warning hung in the air as Lady Blackthorne led Lydia back to the main part of the manor. Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something far bigger, and far darker, than she had anticipated. That evening, as she sat alone in her room, she flipped through the journal again, her fingers tracing the cryptic words. "The room behind the rose." What could it mean? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, Damien was standing there, his expression unreadable. "Care for a walk?" he asked. "There's something I need to show you." And just like that, Lydia found herself following him into the shadows once more, the mystery of Blackthorne Manor deepening with every step. Lydia followed Damien through the dimly lit corridors of Blackthorne Manor, her heart thudding in her chest. The flickering sconces cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, and the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath their feet was the only sound breaking the silence. Damien moved with the ease of someone who knew the manor's labyrinthine layout by heart. His demeanor was calm, almost nonchalant, but Lydia couldn't shake the sense that he was deliberately keeping her in the dark, leading her somewhere without revealing the purpose. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "You'll see," Damien replied, glancing back at her with a faint smile. "Do you always need all the answers up front, Miss Harrington?" Lydia frowned. "I prefer not to wander blindly into the unknown." "That's fair," he said, though his tone was light. "But sometimes the unknown has a way of revealing itself when you least expect it." They turned a corner and descended a narrow staircase that spiraled down into the manor's lower levels. The air grew cooler, the scent of damp stone mingling with something faintly metallic. Lydia shivered, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. At the bottom of the stairs, Damien stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it with a practiced motion. "Welcome to the archives," he said, pushing the door open. The room beyond was unlike anything Lydia had seen in the manor so far. Rows of shelves filled with books, ledgers, and boxes stretched into the darkness, illuminated by a single gas lamp flickering near the center of the room. The atmosphere was oppressive, as if the weight of centuries of secrets pressed down on her. "What is this place?" she asked, stepping inside cautiously. "This is where the Blackthorne family keeps its records," Damien said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Financial accounts, correspondence, deeds, and other, less conventional documents." "Less conventional?" Lydia repeated, raising an eyebrow. Damien's expression grew serious. "The Blackthorne family has a long and complicated history. Not all of it is as noble as Lady Evangeline might want you to believe. Some of it, well, let's just say it's not meant for public eyes." Lydia felt a thrill of both curiosity and trepidation. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're different," Damien said simply. "And because I think you have a right to know what you've walked into." He led her to a particular shelf near the back of the room and pulled down a leather-bound ledger. The book was old, its pages yellowed with age, and the title embossed on the cover read, "Family Legacies, 1835 to 1857. "Take a look," Damien said, opening the book to a marked page and handing it to her. Lydia scanned the text, her brow furrowing as she read. It was an account of an ancestor named Percival Blackthorne, who had reportedly died under mysterious circumstances in 1847. According to the ledger, Percival had been obsessed with uncovering what he called the heart of the rose, a phrase that appeared multiple times in his writings. "The heart of the rose," Lydia murmured. "It's similar to what Charles wrote, The Room Behind the Rose." Damien nodded. "It's not a coincidence. Whatever this is, it's been part of the Blackthorne family lore for generations. Some say it's a hidden room filled with treasure. Others believe it's something darker, something the family has gone to great lengths to conceal." Lydia closed the ledger, her hands trembling slightly. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I think you're the key to unraveling it," Damien said, his gaze steady. "You're an outsider, someone who isn't bound by the family's lies or loyalties. That makes you dangerous to the people who want these secrets to stay buried." Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air in the archives. "Do you believe any of it?" Damien hesitated, his expression unreadable. "I believe there's truth in every story, no matter how far-fetched it seems. And I believe that whatever Charles was trying to uncover, it got him killed." The words hung in the air like a thundercloud, heavy with implication. Lydia's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the mystery she had stumbled into. Before she could respond, a sound echoed from somewhere above, a faint, high-pitched whistle, like the wind forcing its way through a narrow crack. Lydia froze, her heart pounding. "What was that?" she whispered. Damien frowned, his posture tensing. "Stay here." He moved toward the stairs, his footsteps swift but silent. Lydia wanted to follow, but her instincts held her back. Instead, she scanned the shelves around her, her eyes landing on a stack of journals that looked similar to the one Lady Blackthorne had shown her. She pulled one down and opened it, her breath catching as she read the first entry. The handwriting was Charles's, but the words were jagged and desperate, as if written in a fevered state. "They're watching. Always watching. The rose is the key, but the thorns are deadly. Trust no one. Not even her." Lydia's hands trembled as she turned the page. The next entry was worse, filled with fragmented sentences and cryptic warnings. "The maze hides more than memories. The mirror shows the truth, but only if you ask the right question." A sudden noise snapped her attention back to the present. The door to the archives creaked open, but it wasn't Damien standing there. A shadowy figure loomed in the doorway, its features obscured by the dim light. Lydia's heart leapt into her throat as the figure stepped forward, and she realized with horror that they were holding something that glinted faintly in the flickering light. "Miss Harrington," the figure said, their voice low and unfamiliar. "You've been asking too many questions." Lydia took a step back, clutching the journal to her chest. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, they advanced another step, the glint of metal in their hand resolving into the shape of a knife. Lydia's mind raced. She couldn't run, the room was a dead end, but she refused to go down without a fight. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy brass candlestick, and held it in front of her like a weapon. The figure paused, their head tilting slightly, as if amused. Then, without warning, they lunged. The room erupted into chaos. Lydia's instincts kicked in as the shadowy figure lunged toward her. She swung the brass candlestick with all her might, the metal colliding with a dull thud against the attacker's arm. They stumbled, momentarily thrown off balance, and she seized the opportunity to dart around them, clutching Charles's journal tightly. The air in the archives was stifling, filled with the sound of her ragged breathing and the ominous shuffle of footsteps as the figure recovered. She spotted the staircase leading back to the manor's main level and sprinted toward it, her boots skidding on the stone floor. "Stop," the figure barked, their voice sharp and commanding. Lydia didn't stop. She bolted up the stairs two at a time, her heart pounding in her ears. As she reached the top, Damien appeared, his expression darkening at the sight of her panicked face. "Lydia, what happened?" he demanded. "There's someone down there," she gasped, gripping his arm. "They attacked me." Damien's gaze shifted to the open door of the archives, his jaw tightening. "Stay here." Before she could protest, he descended the stairs with a speed and purpose that made her heart race even faster. Lydia stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold stone wall, straining to hear what was happening below. There was a muffled scuffle, followed by silence. Then, Damien reappeared, his expression grim. "They're gone," he said. "Gone." Lydia repeated, her voice incredulous. "How is that possible? There's only one exit." Damien didn't answer immediately. Instead he studied her, his gaze lingering on the journal she clutched tightly. "Is that what they were after?" "I don't know," she stammered, holding it out to him. "It's Charles's. It was on one of the shelves." Damien took the journal, flipping through its pages with practiced ease. His brow furrowed as he scanned the jagged handwriting and cryptic notes. "This is significant," he murmured. "Charles was unraveling something dangerous. Whoever attacked you doesn't want the truth to come to light." Lydia's pulse quickened. "Do you think they'll come back?" "Count on it," Damien said, his tone grim. But they've underestimated you. They won't make that mistake again. He tucked the journal under his arm and gestured for her to follow. Come. We need to speak with Lady Blackthorn. The walk back to the main hall was tense, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions. When they reached the drawing room, Lady Blackthorn was seated near the fire, her sharp features illuminated by the flickering flames. Evangeline, Damien said without preamble, there's been an incident. Lady Blackthorn's gaze flicked to Lydia, her expression hardening. Explain. Lydia recounted what had happened in the archives, her voice steady despite the lingering fear in her chest. As she spoke, Lady Blackthorn's face grew taut, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. This cannot continue, she said when Lydia finished. Her voice was low, trembling with barely concealed anger. The past refuses to stay buried. What does that mean? Lydia asked. Lady Blackthorn rose, pacing toward the window. The light from the fire cast her shadow long and jagged across the room. The Blackthorn name is not without its enemies, she said. For generations, we've been the keepers of knowledge. Knowledge that others would kill to possess. She turned to face Lydia, her dark eyes piercing. And now it seems you've been dragged into this. I didn't ask to be, Lydia said, her voice rising. I don't even know what this is. What's so important about Charles's journal? What is everyone looking for? Lady Blackthorn hesitated, her composure faltering for the first time. There is a room in this house, she said slowly, her words heavy with meaning. A room that only Charles knew how to access. It holds something valuable. Something dangerous. I believe your attacker is searching for it. And you think this room is connected to the rose? Lydia asked, pointing to the journal. I do, Lady Blackthorn said. But I don't know how. Charles never confided in me fully. He said it was safer that way. Lydia felt a surge of frustration. The pieces of the puzzle were there, tantalizingly close, but they refused to fit together. What do we do now? She asked. We protect you, Damien said firmly. Whoever attacked you won't stop. We need to stay one step ahead. And we find the room, Lydia added, determination hardening her voice. Lady Blackthorn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. But be warned, Miss Harrington, once you start down this path, there is no turning back. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with questions and fears, and the journal's cryptic phrases seemed to echo in her thoughts. She finally rose from her bed, unable to endure the oppressive stillness any longer. The halls of Blackthorn Manor were eerily quiet as she wandered. The sconces flickered as if the shadows themselves were alive. She wasn't sure where she was going, but her feet carried her toward the east wing, the part of the manor Lady Blackthorn had warned her was forbidden. She rounded a corner and stopped short. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was a figure. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of familiarity that made Lydia's breath catch. He turned slightly, and for a fleeting moment, she could have sworn it was Charles Blackthorn. Charles, she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he turned and vanished into the shadows. Lydia's heart pounded as she raced after him, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. She reached the end of the hallway and found herself standing before an ornate door carved with roses. The door was slightly ajar. Her hand trembled as she pushed it open. Inside was a room unlike any other in the manor. Its walls were lined with mirrors, their surfaces warped and cracked. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay a single blood-red rose encased in glass. Lydia stepped closer, her reflection fracturing in the mirrors around her. As she reached out to touch the glass, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging the room into darkness. And then she heard the whisper. You shouldn't have come here.